Good morning. Uh, Trading Standards, we're going to be talking today about e-bikes and e-scooter sales, repairs, and the safety compliance issues that face businesses and consumers in the UK.
That we are specifically aiming this webinar at e-bike repairers, manufacturers. We do appreciate there are a lot of issues around e-bikes and e-bike sales from a consumer point of view, about following instructions for use, about road safety issues, about fire safety issues, but this is specifically for e-bike repair businesses.
And just to be aware that there's been a lot of news articles in relationship to e-bike safety. It is high on the agenda for compliance issues in the UK relating to fires, because it does prevalently cause fires in the UK, and on average at this moment in time, 32 e-bike fires are taking place every month. So there is an ongoing concern with fires caused by defective, non-compliant batteries associated with e-bikes and e-scooters.
So as you know, everyone's aware because of the media, the e-bike, e-scooter fires can be very explosive. They go up very quickly, and we'll talk about some of the technical reasons that happens as we go through. But that their rapid spread and the quick release of the gases is the danger really. So what we're trying to do is inform you guys to reduce the chances of that happening. So make sure you're complying with the regulations, doing your jobs properly. So the one of the big issues around e-bikes is the charging element in the home. If they're not following instructions which you may deliver to the consumer, and they're charging them overnight when the families are sleeping, they don't realise that the battery packs, for example, are heating up, and eventually, subsequently, some people tragically die. So that we talked about the stats in terms of the monthly figures, but 11 people have lost their lives since 2022 in an e-bike or e-scooter fire, including families with young children. So this is why it's a big concern for everybody, and so one of the reasons why we're doing the webinar for you today.
So one of the things that we really wanted to highlight is that how can consumers be aware of e-bike safety. So the first thing that when you're looking to purchase an e-bike or an e-scooter is you need to be looking at buying it from a reputable retailer who's got test certificates for the actual bikes or scooters that they've actually purchase, because they have to comply to specific safety legislation, and they have to have systems in place in relationship to product recall, to make sure that the products that they're selling relating to e-bikes and e-scooters are safe to be placed on the marketplace. And if there is a problem with recall, they've got the mechanisms to recall and make consumers aware of defective products that need to be recalled. So that's a kind of a key thing that needs to be looked at. The other big issue is in relationship to repairs of e-bikes. Now, there are a number of e-bike retailers who provide a repair facility with their business. They need to be mindful that buying a brand new e-bike, it was manufactured to the specific standards and design, but once the e-bike has left the sales room, you don't know what's actually impacted on that bike. So like an e-bike scooter could be a mountain bike that's been dropped onto a sharp rock, or somebody's fallen off. It may well have damaged the actual casing of the battery, and then subsequently to bring the bike in to be repaired, you're then unaware of the actual battery's life and in relationship to impacts and damage to the actual cells. So it kind of best practice to actually say that you will repair the bike, but to eliminate the actual safety issue of the battery cell itself, you could actually say to the person, we will service the battery components relating to it and the drivetrain, etc., etc. But the actual battery we will give back to the consumer. So you've eliminated the risk of an unsafe battery in the workshops and in the premise, while you focus on the repair to the bike. So when the actual customer comes back to the repair shop, they can reinsert the battery and all the repairs to the actual bike have been carried out, and you've eliminated or minimized the risk of containing an unsafe battery in your premises. The other thing is to be aware of is to document that. So when somebody does actually bring in an e-bike, to be aware that you actually record on your sales invoice that you've given them the battery, and you will not take any responsibility for it, because you are focusing on the repairs to the bike in relationship to different aspects of the bike itself, which gives you the kind of continuity of evidence to show what's happened to your repair. The other issue is aftermarket components being added to bikes, and one of the key issues is removing the speed restriction to the e-bike. So if you somebody brings in a bike that's been restricted and you've realized that is the case, then it's advantageous when you're carrying out the service of that bike that you note that the actual restriction has been taken place, because there have been issues where these bikes have been ridden on paths without the restrictor in place, and sadly there's been fatalities where people have been knocked down and sadly injured through the higher speeds. And one of the biggest issues with the bike itself is that the actual bike was designed to brake with certain Newton forces. When you've added an additional motor, or they're not fit for purpose and it won't stop as required through normal torque of a normal pedaling process for a human being, with the added motor, it's not fit for purpose for a braking mechanism. So again, by noting it down on the sales and repairs form that that this bike has got components that are not fit for purpose through this aftermarket process.
We've got some advice to go through in a bit, but I think first we're going to show a video from one of the members of the public that bought a bike that caught fire and the impact it's had on their family.
It was about to be one of the best times of our life. Our little son Oliver was about to finish play school. He was about to go into full-time school. That meant Gemma could finally get a job and we could start actually having a decent life, because ever since Lily was born, Gemma had become a full-time mum, and all our lives were literally about to start, and it just all got snuffed out in a night. Well, I've been working at M&S for coming up to 11 years, and I've been riding to work, doing it in the wind, the rain, the traffic, any sort of condition you could think of. I just thought, our lives are about to get easier now. It's literally just supposed to be a luxury item just to make all our lives easier. If I'd known that it could cause this, I never would have bought it. We were woken in the night by an almighty bang. The floor shaked, the house echoed. By the time I got outside my bedroom, I could see the glow of the fire. There was flames coming up the stairs like a flamethrower. I've never seen anything like it. I was terrified for my children. I knew something had to be done, so I jumped out the window. I told Gemma I'll be back in a minute. I basically got into the back door and the entire hallway was engulfed in flames, and I could just see this massive glow just right above my bike. Everything was on fire. So I ran back out to the back garden and started calling for Gemma and the kids to jump. The last thing I ever heard from my girlfriend was, "We can't get out, we're stuck." called for about 2 more times, but I never got an answer from her again. At that point, I collapsed on the floor in tears. I closed my eyes after that, and I woke up 4 weeks later in hospital. I'd been in a coma for 4 weeks, and no one had made it out of the house. And now I've got to live with this fact that, do they know that I helped? Or was the last memory of me, where the hell is Dad? My son was found in his bedroom. My girlfriend was found in the doorway of my bedroom. And my daughter was found under the bed with my dogs. But I can guarantee that in the next couple of years, everyone will know someone who had an accident with an e-bike and was in a fire. And we are trusting the government that they are safe, but they are not. They need to be regulated, they need to be checked. Change the rules to save someone's life. My life has been ruined, but I can save someone else's.
Thanks to Scott for making that video. So how do you deal with the issues that we're all kind of aware of? So one of the things you need to be doing is making sure the chargers and batteries must be safe. Common sense sounds obvious. So it means that you're supplying the chargers of the batteries from a suitable source. And what checks have you done as a manufacturer or retailer to prove that they are safe? Where are you getting them from? What test certificates have you seen to prove the stuff that you are selling on can be relied on to be safe? So, for example, the chargers and the batteries must be supplied with adequate warnings and instructions. So anything that you're supplying should include the labels, the instructions, to make sure people are following those instructions. Then the product itself is a safe product. All the parts need to be compatible with each other. This is something that we're finding where people are particularly doing repairs. They're repairing individual components within the battery management system and not necessarily checking they are compatible with each other.
So just to highlight again about the conversion kits that you can find on certain websites, there needs to be an awareness that that the kits may not be legally compliant, and that the legal responsibility of these alterations to a normal push bike may cause damage through negligent behaviour and antisocial behaviour through driving on walkways and what have you with a motorised push bike that is above the legal limit. So there just needs to be an awareness that if you are going to have that type of kit and the consumers are going to buy them, that they are factored in, that the actual aftermarket kit complies to the legislation in relationship to the restricted speed and the wattage of motor. There are certain aftermarket components and products out there that don't have that facility in place relating to speed, and the actual wattage of the motors are above the legal requirements.
Something else you can check is that the parts you're using haven't been recalled as potentially part of a previous fire. So there's a link to the UK product recall alert system, which will supply at the end of the PowerPoint presentation here, something for you to easily check to make sure the parts that you're supplying or using aren't on that list.
So the document that you need to look at for recall is called a PAS 7100, and we will provide that as an additional link for businesses to refer to, because it has all the information that you need to carry out a product recall and document the processes to carry out that recall process.
I think point 6 is an important one, because if you're modifying or repairing a battery management system and or an e-bike battery, you will be legally responsible for it. So think about modifications, repairs, and the testing that you do or the checks that you've done to make sure that those components work together without causing a risk.
And I think the key thing in relationship to you are an expert in actual selling e-bikes and repairing e-bikes. So when somebody comes into the shop and asks for a specific e-bike and asks for alterations to be carried out, or brings in an e-bike that's had an alteration carried out, you can and rightfully can just refuse to say, no, I'm sorry, we cannot provide that service, and feel full completely within your rights, because at the end of the day, contractually, it's an offer to treat in relationship to their offering to carry out that facility, and it's up to you to accept it or not. So if you don't feel that's comfortable in your business model to do that, then if you can't enter into a legally binding contract if you don't accept their offer. So it's just to be mindful of that situation.
Yeah, know your limitations, and think about what training you've had. Some of the the global brands provide training for you on how to repair their kits, I'm sure, as you would appreciate. So have you had an appropriate training course from an appropriate manufacturer?
So we're going to drill down into more complex interpretation of the law. So one of the key bits of legislation that relates to e-bikes themselves is the Supplier of Machinery Safety Regulations 2008. And this basically looks at the assembly, the fitting, the drivetrain, in relationship to all the components associated with the e-bike that you need to be mindful of. And additional legislation under the Consumer Rights Act 2015 is looking at professional due diligence. So you need to be assured when carrying out the supply of an e-bike or a repair to an e-bike that you've taken all due diligence to make sure that the actual component or bike or repair is safe when placed on the marketplace.
Yeah, so selling a complete e-bike or e-scooter falls under the supply of machinery regulations, whereas if you're offering conversion kits along with a charging cable, that would fall under the Electrical Equipment Safety Regulations 2016, which specifically deals with the safety elements, voltage, etc., with those parts of the kit.
So the key thing is with electrical equipment safety regulations is that that's really relating to the actual lead and 13 amp plug that connects to your mains electrical system. That there are specific things that you need to look at. So it's the actual make sure that the plug is compliant, and make sure that the actual transformer that connects to your e-bike is properly monitoring the actual heat. So if you put your hand on the transformer, it's overheating, you just need to be aware of it, because one of the key issues with the electrical component is it overheating. So it's always best practice never to charge your bike overnight. It's far better to do it in the daytime. So if you do smell or touch the component of the transformer and feel that it's going above its normal operating temperature, this is the time to disconnect it from the power supply.
And the battery itself falls under the General Product Safety Regulations 2005. So there's additional regulations under that called the Batteries and Accumulators Placing on the Market Regulations, which apply to the new batteries. But the GPSR, General Product Safety Regulations, cover things like the general safety requirements and the information you provide, informing people of the risks that might be posed if and how to avoid those. Effectively instructions for use. It includes requirements around your business name and address, traceability, product reference numbers, and your due diligence procedures in terms of what you've done to make sure the thing is safe, whether that's testing, keeping a register of complaints, informing distributors of all your customers of recall potential issues, and the repairs. The repairing parts you're using should be comparable design, correctly designed specs in the same specifications, as in compatible parts as to the machine you're using. So don't mix and match different manufacturers' parts on the same e-bike battery, because potentially the management systems won't talk to each other.
And I would add that in relationship to repairs, technology's moved on that much further that now a lot of the actual drive chains and motors and batteries, they have to be synced up with their codes and logged onto the manufacturer's website before they will authorize the actual motor and drivetrain to function. So, the larger manufacturers who specialize in those, so the ones that don't have those systems in place in relationship to be able to nullify the actual drivetrain and battery without electronic authorizations, they're the ones to be wary of when looking at the bike repair itself.
So the danger from the power comes from the battery cells, as in the building blocks that generate the chemical reaction, usually lithium-ion cells, typically 3.7 volts per cell. And of course, people put batteries in series to make it more powerful. And there's the kind of the ultimate dream of having a lot of power with not a lot of weight. So smaller, lighter cells are being kind of developed all the time, with thinner layers between them. And when the battery cells get damaged, the separating materials within the battery can squash together. They're already only what does it say? The cell separators are only 20 ultramicrons thick, and a human hair is 70. So already they're very thin. A little bit of damage on top of that makes them touch, and that's where the electrical circuit runs away with itself.
So this is really crucial. So one of the biggest issues is damaged battery cells, and I would highlight, if you are a bike hire outlet, so every day your bikes are being hired out. Once they've left your premises and the customers decided to ride off into the distance, you don't know if they've fallen off the bike, thrown it onto a rock, or whatever. There is the potential of these battery cells being damaged. So it's always best practice when the bike comes back off hire to actually carry out a visual check on the actual battery casing and look and make sure that there is no damage, as well as carrying out basic checks on the cell loads to make sure that there is no issues caused by the previous hire before you recharge the battery cells overnight. That shouldn't be done, because the issue is if you're hiring a bike and then you decide to charge the batteries overnight. I am aware that there have been issues that nobody's monitoring the batteries overheating. So it's always best practice, if you are running a hire business, to make sure that you charge the batteries in the daytime when the staff are able to monitor the actual charging units on the business premise.
Yeah, on a practical basis, we're aware that some of the cheaper parts don't have the automatic cutoff when they reach their full charge, so they'll just keep charging and charging and charging, getting hotter and hotter. So just think about that as part of your diligence procedures as well.
So again, this is just really highlighting on this next slide about connecting battery cells and the power that you can get from them. As you're building up the batteries in this format, there is the incumbence of increasing the actual ampage and power supply of the unit.
Yeah, generally the battery packs themselves consist of parallel and series.
So to highlight here is just to kind of give you an understanding, an overview of the actual lithium battery technology and how it's developed. So as you can see in this image here, we've got the Swiss cheese model, which is looking at the actual layer of protection. And the key thing that's important is the BMS, is the actual battery management system. that is crucial to making sure that those load cells are properly controlled and do not overheat, because that is what will cause the actual issues with the battery and potential hazard.
Yeah, so effectively, just do all the component parts work together? So that includes the power source, the charger, the battery pack, and the battery cells.
So the other thing to be aware of is with new technology and different types of bikes. So one of the things to look at is that we look at e-bikes, which have basically got a power cell associated with the chassis of the actual bike. But road bikes, some manufacturers actually have the battery in the stem of the frame, and another manufacturer has the actual batteries in the derailleur. So again, you just need to make sure that you monitor and check the actual condition, the actual any damage to those batteries that you may not be aware of in the normal use of riding a road bike, because it is quite common that with clip-on road bikes you do fall off them, and there's always that risk of damaging those smaller battery cells placed upon that road bike.
So to counteract that, a good electronic circuit actually monitors and controls the charge and discharge of the battery pack, so it will prevent overcharging and over discharge, and it will monitor the temperatures so it can turn itself off if it needs to.
And one of the issues that we're finding in trading standards at the moment is some of the Chinese imported batteries, aftermarket kits, and what have you. Their battery management systems are seriously non-compliant and don't actually make sure that the actual batteries themselves are being properly managed when being charged or discharged, which causes the batteries to overheat, and this is why we're having these potential fire hazards taking place. So again, really do need to emphasize that battery management and how it's carried out is fundamental to the actual safety of the actual batteries themselves. And again, those simple methods of smell and touch are really comparable in making sure that you notify or notice any kind of issues with the actual battery management system, not just for businesses but for the customers themselves when they're charging them at home.
And the last point on that slide is around think about where the battery management system is located. They're not necessarily always with the battery themselves. So if you've taken the battery off of the bike to charge it, it's not then connected to the BMS, and so it's not doing the monitoring, it's not doing the automatic shut off. So think about that as part of your safety.
So just to give a bit of an overview of thermal overrun, this is quite a technical image, but to simplify it, you can just see the actual how it kind of progresses through the amount of energy and the temperature that's developed through the actual loading process. So it's worth looking at that slide on the graph and see how it can actually develop through its stages of charge.
Basically, thermal runaway is just when the heat generated is generated faster than it can be dissipated, and that comes down to the materials that you're using in the batteries themselves.
So, like the fire brigade would say to you, if it is overheating, or is not to throw water onto it, because that is fundamentally going to cause the actual a chain reaction of the load cells.
So in the normal sort of fire triangle, which you may be familiar with, the batteries actually add that extra element, the chemical reaction element. So now you need to consider the heat, fuel, oxygen, and the chemical reaction sources as part of when you're writing instructions for use. Have all those elements been considered about where you're storing, where you're charging?
And this is really key when if you are storing batteries in your premise. So just to be aware of about metal containers holding these batteries, the traceability, the storage of the batteries. And the other thing is to look at the check the insurance requirements for your business in relationship to storing these battery cells. There's the issues there. And one of the issues that I've seen in trading standards is that a shop was a retail outlet, but above it was residential flats, and there was no fire barrier from the actual commercial shop to the actual residential premises above that was fit for purpose for this ilk of business. So again, it is worth speaking to the business who's supplying you the rental for the premises, the lease, or if you're actually going to purchase the business unit, to make sure that the fire barriers are fit for purpose and the structure of the building is there if you're in that situation with a business and retail outlet, because of looking at the possibilities of fire.
Yeah, things to be aware of when thinking about what can start that fire. The extreme temperatures, too cold, too hot. Again, think about where people are storing their batteries. Do they leave them in their garage without a heater in? So in the middle of winter when it's -10, that's not going to do the actual battery material or the component parts any good. Similarly, in the middle of summer, if they're being stored in a stairwell, or I'd like to think people wouldn't put them in the greenhouse, but you get what I'm saying. So think about the temperature extremes. And mechanically, these things are susceptible to be damaged when they're dropped, when they're being bumped up and down curbs. Every time you do that and you take a little chunk out, or an impact on the battery itself can reduce those the distances between the batteries, and an additional vibration, additional shock could be the one that takes it over the edge.
So again, issues with over lifetime. Everything has a life period, so just to the batteries do degrade, so the load cells through the charging process will lose charge, and there is that awareness of degradation. Again, manufacturing issues. You didn't manufacture the battery, so you're relying on a test certificate to make sure that the battery is legally compliant and that they've carried out a number of tests on it. But the physical things that you can look at the batteries when the batteries do, so the e-bike with the battery does come into your premises, is to carry out a generic test on it to look at if there's any damaged welds or loose components or misalignments associated with the batteries and the casings and the drive unit relating to the electric motor, and make sure it's interlined with the production compliance requirements for the actual motor and the battery are all fit for purpose.
And as with any electrical product, really, you could be aware of the potential for short circuiting, for overcharging, for quickly enforcing discharges. The batteries can just fail, and of course they do have a tough life. So from all the way through, right till the end of the battery's life, which they don't last forever either. So you think about how long a battery life would be.
So and the other key thing is how to manage when the disposal of lithium batteries. So you just need to have the systems and procedures in place that if you are going to replace a lithium battery, you're going to be responsible for removal and disposal of the lithium battery product. So you need to have the systems in place to actually store it and then dispose of it, and have traceability on where those components are being disposed of.
So again, this slide just to highlight some of the risks involved. So risk is the likelihood times the severity, and things that would increase that risk are people abusing the batteries, riding the bikes up and down curbs, using it outside of its design parameters, for example, leaving it to charge for too long or not enough. Think about crash damage, using the wrong type of batteries or battery cells, from an unreliable source. Think about how the battery packs have been modified, if they've been homemade, again tampered with, people trying to increase the power. Think about the parts not being compatible, as we've already said. Different types of chargers are using the right charger for the right batteries. And then the things that increase the severity are where are they being charged, the HMO is a house of multiple occupation. Are they in a high-rise flat? Are they doing it in a stairwell where escape routes are blocked or can be blocked? Think about things that are being placed near the bike. Is it next to a cardboard box full of tissues or something ridiculous? But think about that when you're issuing your instructions for use. Think about how you want people, where you want people to do the actual charging itself.
So one of the key things which is quite prevalent is most people do actually, because they bring the bike in from the garage and they need a charging point, and so they charge it in their kitchen. So and that situation is they leave it on charge unmonitored because it's in the kitchen when they're in the lounge, or they may have actually left their actual dwelling. So it's always best practice that if you are carrying out or the consumer's carrying out the charging of their unit, you make the customer aware that they need to carry out the charging under supervision.
Some other things just to think about, if we haven't already covered these, but the public awareness of the dangers. Do they understand that they need to follow instructions that you're providing them with? Have you made that clear because of the dangers involved? And as we've seen in Scott's video, there are some real dangers. So be aware that reputable manufacturers put the time and the effort and the money into making sure that things are safe, compliant, and the whole system is been tested. Whereas the unscrupulous manufacturers, and there are some out there, they don't go through those lengths and choose to ignore them really, just to make a quick buck. And that's where you see things like the Swiss cheese, the holy component parts that increase the risks.
And I think the key thing is educating consumers in relationship. You get what you pay for. So I know that there are a number of e-bikes you can buy from anything from £500 to £1,000, and then the kind of middle of the road e-bike is about £2,500 and could go all the way up to £10,000. So that there is a reason why that they're more expensive, and it's because of the actual safety mechanisms, the legal compliance, the testing, the R&D that's been carried out. And by educating consumers when they're looking to buy an e-bike, to say, there's a reason why that bike is at that price bracket, is because there is that potential that they haven't carried out all of those safety checks or carried out the R&D, or there may well be issues. Not to say that they're not fully safe at that price bracket, but there is an underlining non-compliance issue in those price bracket areas between £500 to £1,000.
Electrical Safety First are very good at the consumer advice element. So, for example, they'll say that make sure that the consumers are using the charger supplied by the manufacturer, making sure that the batteries are being charged in a safe place, that they don't charge batteries where they prevent you from escaping in the event of a fire. Common sense things, but nevertheless important things to remind people about, to make sure that the batteries aren't being charged next to combustible materials, not in direct sunlight where the temperatures like to be high. That the batteries themselves aren't covered to again increase the heat element. That the battery charging is being monitored, and think things like that. So Electrical Safety First is quite good for the consumer advice elements.
So this is a slide just to kind of be an aid memoir specifically on the legislation. So the for the e-bikes, there's the EN 15194 2017. That's a specific standard that you can get from British standards. If you are technically looking at technical files when importing e-bikes, you need to make sure that it refers to that standard. Again, for scooters, batteries and charging cables, they are all the relevant standards that you should refer to for making sure that they comply to the associated regulations, specifically under supply of machinery safety regulations 2008. And in relationship to the batteries, it's the general product safety regulations, because they've got to be safe and made a good engineering practice. And in relationship to the cables, the electrical equipment safety regulations 2016, again, they need to comply to that EN standard to make sure they comply with the essential safety requirement of the cable.
So that was a pretty brief, quick run through, quite specific, quite technical. So you're probably thinking, oh, crikey, what do I do now? There are plenty of places that can help you. So this slide gives you an example of where the guidance is based. So you can see, scan the screen if you like, but Google works just as well. And you can look at the guidance for all of the regulations, the standards, the recalls, the PAS. Electrical safety first, the product recalls, the legislation. There's a lot of help out there.
Yeah, so it's useful to use the QR codes, but if ever in doubt, then I think the best thing to do in your area which you are retailing or importing e-bikes or e-scooters would be to contact your local trading standards.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.